Elena Voss learned early that silence was safer than speech. In the Blackthorn pack, an Omega who spoke up was an Omega who got noticed, and being noticed never brought her anything good. So for 3 years, she swept the training grounds, carried water to the warriors, and mended torn cloaks by candlelight, always careful to keep her eyes down and her voice quiet. She had come to the pack as a child, the only survivor of a small settlement burned in a border skirmish nobody quite remembered the cause of. The Blackthorns had taken her in, not out of kindness, but because an extra pair of hands was useful, and a girl with no family to claim her would never cause trouble. She grew up believing this was simply how her life would be: small, quiet, useful, but never valued. Alpha Damien Blackthorn made sure she never forgot her place. He was the kind of alpha other packs feared and respected in equal measure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a voice that could silence a room without him raising it. He had inherited the pack at 22 after his father's sudden death, and in the 5 years since, he had built a reputation for strength that bordered on ruthlessness. To him, the pack was a hierarchy, and hierarchies needed reminders of where everyone stood. Elena, it seemed, was his favorite reminder. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, not exactly. Damien genuinely believed that weakness endangered a pack, that the trembling and the meek pulled everyone down with them. Elena's quiet nature, her refusal to fight back, her habit of flinching at raised voices, all of it read to him as proof of his theory. He never physically hurt her. He did not need to. Words were enough, and he used them with the precision of a man who had never once doubted himself. The gathering came once a year, when allied packs traveled from their territories to trade, negotiate, and settle disputes under the old traditions. It was the largest event on the calendar, held on the ancient grounds outside Blackthorn territory, where a wide stone floor sat carved with symbols so old that most pack historians had stopped trying to translate them. Nobody thought much about the markings anymore. They were simply part of the scenery, like the old oak trees ringing the clearing. This year, 5 packs had gathered, their alphas and senior members filling the wooden benches around the stone floor. Elena had been assigned to serve refreshments, weaving between the crowd with a tray of drinks, doing her best to remain invisible. She nearly succeeded. Then Damien saw her. He had been drinking a little more than usual, buoyed by a successful trade negotiation earlier that day, and something about the sight of Elena, moving quietly through the crowd, struck him as the perfect object lesson. He had been telling a rival alpha about the importance of strength within a pack, about how weakness could not be tolerated if a pack wanted to survive. And there she was, walking proof of his point. "Elena!" he called, his voice cutting through the noise of the gathering. "Come here." She froze, tray still in her hands, and every head within earshot turned toward her. She had no choice but to obey. She set the tray down and crossed the open space toward him, feeling the weight of dozens of unfamiliar eyes. "This," Damien said, gesturing toward her as though she were an exhibit, "is what happens when a pack lets weakness linger too long. No lineage worth speaking of. No strength to offer. 3 years in my pack, and she has done nothing but carry trays and mend cloth." He turned to the alphas around him, warming to his own performance. "Some would say I should have turned her away as a pup, but I believe even the weakest among us can serve some purpose, if we put them in their proper place." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd. Others simply watched, unsure what to do with the display. Elena stood very still, her face burning, her hands clenched at her sides where no one could see them shaking. "Kneel," Damien said. "Show them what a servant looks like, so they understand the difference between strength and weakness." For a moment, Elena did not move. Something in her chest twisted, sharp and unfamiliar, a feeling she had spent years teaching herself not to have. But 3 years of practiced obedience won out over whatever was rising inside her, and slowly, she lowered herself to her knees on the ancient stone floor. The moment her knees touched the carved symbols, the world changed. Light bloomed beneath her, pale gold and impossibly bright, tracing the old markings from where she knelt outward across the entire floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several elders shot to their feet, faces pale with a recognition the younger generation did not share. The symbols, dormant for over 100 years, pulsed with slow, deliberate light, as though something ancient had simply been waiting to wake up. Damien took a step back, his earlier confidence draining from his face. What is this? An old woman near the front, one of the few historians who still studied the original pack lore, rose unsteadily from her seat. Her name was Marin, and she had spent decades trying to translate texts nobody else cared about. She stared at the glowing floor with an expression somewhere between terror and awe. "The Moon Court seal," she whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "That is the bloodline seal of the original Moon Court." The name meant little to the younger alphas, who had grown up thinking of the Moon Court as a bedtime story, a myth used to explain why alphas held power at all. But the older generation knew better. Long before packs organized themselves into territories and treaties, the Moon Court was said to have granted the first alphas their strength, binding it into their bloodlines in exchange for an oath of protection over their people. The court's own bloodline had vanished from history generations ago, presumed extinct, its authority nothing more than an old story told to children. Except stories, it seemed, did not always stay in the past. The light around Elena intensified, then settled, wrapping around her like a second skin before fading into her, leaving faint golden traces beneath her skin that pulsed once and disappeared. She knelt there, breathing hard, staring at her own hands as though they belonged to someone else. Then Damien fell. He did not choose to kneel. His legs simply buckled beneath him, an invisible weight pressing him down until he, too, was on his knees, directly across from Elena, his face a mixture of confusion and something close to panic. The pack elders around him began speaking rapidly among themselves, but Marin raised a trembling hand for silence. "The old laws," she said, her voice carrying across the stunned clearing. "An alpha, who demeans a Moon Court heir before witnesses, invokes the servitude bond. It is old magic, older than any of our current treaties. I did not think it could still activate. I did not think there was any bloodline left to activate it." "That's not possible," Damien said, his voice rough. He tried to stand and could not. Whatever held him in place was not something strength alone could break. "It is very possible," Marin said quietly, "and it appears to have just happened in front of 200 witnesses." Elena stared across the space between them, at the alpha who had spent 3 years reminding her of exactly how little she mattered, now kneeling before her with an expression she had never once seen on his face: fear. She did not feel triumphant. She felt dizzy, disoriented, as though the ground beneath her had shifted into something she did not recognize. This was not how she had imagined any version of her life. She had never imagined anything for herself at all. "Elena," Damien said her name differently this time, stripped of its usual dismissiveness. "What is happening to me?" She did not have an answer. Nobody did. Not fully. Not that night. The gathering dissolved into chaos and hushed conversation. Alphas from every pack whispering about what this meant for the old treaties, for the hierarchy they had all built their lives around. If the Moon Court bloodline still existed, if it could bind an alpha with a word and a look, then everything they thought they understood about power needed to be reconsidered. In the days that followed, Elena found herself at the center of a world that no longer knew how to treat her. The Blackthorn pack elders, who had barely acknowledged her existence for 3 years, now approached her with careful, measured respect, unsure whether she was an Omega who had gotten lucky or something far greater that none of them yet understood. Marin spent hours with her, poring over old texts, trying to explain what little was known about the Moon Court and what her awakening might mean. "The bond isn't punishment," Marin told her one evening, as they sat together in the small study Elena had been given, an unfamiliar luxury after years of a shared servants' quarters. "It's balance. The old laws believed that power without accountability was dangerous. If an alpha with true strength demeaned someone with the old blood, the bond would humble him, force him to see clearly what he could not see through pride. It doesn't last forever unless you choose it to." "So I could release him," Elena said. "You could. Whether you should is a different question." Damien, for his part, was forced into a role he had never imagined for himself. The compulsion did not make him a puppet. His mind remained entirely his own. But every instinct in him that had once driven him toward command now pulled him toward Elena instead. an unshakable need to see to her comfort, to defer to her judgment, to make amends he had never once considered necessary before. It grated against everything he believed about himself, and slowly, painfully, it began to change him. He found himself watching her differently, not the Omega he had dismissed for 3 years, but a woman who had endured his cruelty with a quiet strength he had mistaken for weakness the entire time. He remembered every insult he had thrown at her, every performance he had made of her supposed worthlessness, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had done. "I was wrong about you," he told her one afternoon, weeks after the gathering, when the golden traces beneath her skin had settled into something like a permanent, quiet glow. "I was wrong about a great many things." "You were," Elena agreed. She was no longer the girl who kept her eyes down. Something had shifted in her, not because of the bond, but because of what surviving 3 years of his contempt, and then surviving the sudden weight of an ancient legacy, had taught her about her own resilience. "But I don't want your service out of fear, Damien. If this bond means anything, I want it to mean something better than that." He looked at her, really looked, in a way he never had before. "Then tell me what you want it to mean." Elena thought of the old texts Marin had shown her, of a bloodline built not on domination, but on protection, on the belief that true strength meant lifting others, rather than standing on them. She thought of every quiet, unseen kindness she had shown the pack over 3 years, without anyone noticing, and of the future she might build, now that people were finally willing to look at her. "I want a pack where no one kneels because they're afraid," she said. "Not Omegas, not Alphas. I want the strength you always talked about to mean something better than cruelty." It was not the answer of someone seeking revenge, and it changed him more than any punishment could have. Over the following months, the Blackthorn pack began to shift under Elena's quiet influence, its old hierarchies softening into something more balanced, more fair. Damien remained bound to her, not by fading magic, which Marin confirmed had settled into something gentler and more permanent, but increasingly by choice. The devotion he had once been forced into became something he no longer wanted to escape, a respect that deepened into loyalty, and eventually, into something warmer neither of them had expected to find in each other. Elena Voss, once dismissed as worthless before an entire gathering of packs, became known instead as the last heir of the Moon Court, a woman whose quiet strength had outlasted every insult meant to break her. And Damien Blackthorn, the alpha who had once knelt her before his pack to prove a point about weakness, learned in the end that the greatest strength he had ever witnessed was the one he had spent 3 years failing to see.